Is George Soros a Nazi? Or is that just some sort of right-wing talking point? So rather than just take my word on it or listen to someone online, let's listen to what George Soros himself has to say. This is from a 1998 60 Minutes interview.
When the Nazis occupied Budapest in 1944, George Soros' father was a successful lawyer. He lived on an island in the Danube and liked to commute to work in a rowboat. But knowing there were problems ahead for the Jews, he decided to split his family up. He bought them forged papers, and he bribed a government official to take 14-year-old George Soros in and swear that he was his Christian godson. But survival carried a heavy price tag. While hundreds of thousands of Hungarian Jews were being shipped off to the death camps, George Soros accompanied his phony godfather on his appointed rounds, confiscating property from the Jews. These are pictures from 1944 of what happened to George Soros' friends and neighbors.
You're a Hungarian Jew who escaped the Holocaust by posing as a Christian.
Right.
And you watched lots of people get shipped off to the death camps.
Right. I was 14 years old. And I would say that that's when my character was made.
In what way?
That one should think ahead, one should understand and anticipate events, and one is threatened. It was a tremendous threat of evil. I mean, it was a very personal experience of evil.
My understanding is that you went out with this protector of yours who swore that you were his adopted godson.
Yes, yes.
Went out, in fact, and helped in the confiscation of property from the Jews.
That's right. Yes.
I mean, that sounds like an experience that would send lots of people to the psychiatric couch for many, many years. Was it difficult?
Not at all. Not at all. Maybe as a child you don't see the connection, but it created no problem at all.
No feeling of guilt.
No.
For example, that I'm Jewish, and here I am watching these people go. I could just as easily be there. I should be there. None of that.
Well, of course, I could be on the other side, or I could be the one from whom the thing is being taken away. But there was no sense that I shouldn't be there, because that was, well, actually, funny way, it's just like in markets, that if I weren't there, of course I wasn't doing it, but somebody else would be taking it away anyhow. In other words, whether I was there or not, I was only a spectator, the property was being taken away. So I had no role in taking away that property. So I had no sense of guilt.
All right, so yeah, let's talk about that. So first of all, yeah, he was 14 years old. He was hiding from the Nazis. He was put up with some family friend, and the family's friend's job for that year was to go around and confiscate property, keep track of the Jews, and then confiscate property from the Jewish people in Hungary in 1944. So that doesn't make George Soros a Nazi at all. He was a boy. I don't hold him responsible. So no, and no, George Soros is not a Nazi. Also, I don't blame anybody, within reason, for stuff that, I was going to say stuff he did when he was 14, but really just stuff that happened to him. So I don't blame him on it. I will point out a couple of weird things. One, they asked him, do you have any, do you have regrets? Do you have any feelings of guilt? And he said, no, not at all. So a little weird. Also, even weirder, and this is not to say he's a Nazi, but even weirder, he describes that year going around taking property from the Jews as the happiest, as quote, the happiest year of my life. So that's also a little bit weird. Also, number three weird thing is, for those that are not just listening to this on the radio, but that are watching it on YouTube or somewhere else, you saw him, he's like once again, who knows what's in people's hearts, but like he just cannot stop himself from smiling as he talks about it. So it's kind of weird. So once again, is that duper's delight? Is that some way of dealing with past trauma? I don't know. But no, he is not a Nazi. But, he does have sort of a weird worldview based on some of the things that he went through. But that sort of brings me around to the next point, which is people who say anyone who attacks George Soros is themselves an anti-Semite. So before we get into that, let's just watch a couple more seconds of this interview.
Are you religious?
No,
Do you believe in God?
no.
Soros told us he believes God was created by man, not the other way around, which may be why he thinks he can smooth out the world's imperfections.
So there's George Soros saying he doesn't believe in God, and he is an atheist. I guess that's sort of different ways of saying the same thing. So is it anti-Semitic to be opposed to somebody who is an atheist who does not believe in God? I mean, if Judaism is a religion, then no. Just by its nature, it's not anti-Semitic. Now, if you're going to say, oh, but, the racist, Nazi, Hitler would still go after somebody. They would consider them a Jew regardless of what they believe based on if their family was, a member of that religion. And that's fine. I actually hear that point. But ultimately, it has to come down to, do we let racists decide what words mean? Or do words have actual meanings? And so in that sense, he's not even a Jew. What about, is he culturally Jewish? And that's a thing. I'll admit that. There are people, just as there are people that are culturally Catholic, I guess, just because they grew up Irish Catholic or they grew up Roman Catholic or whatever, but that's part of their culture. But just because somebody has sort of a tangential or family connection to a religion doesn't mean that being opposed to what they do is based in anti-Semitism. And the perfect example of this, because it's always said the right is anti-Semitic, is somebody like Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck, you can't get more anti-George Soros than him. He literally has come up with a nickname for him, a spooky dude, I believe. And he's devoted for years entire shows to just going off against George Soros. Now, meanwhile, like many on the right, but Glenn Beck to the extreme, you can't get more pro-Israel and by the umbrella of that pro-Jewish than Glenn Beck, but he's against George Soros. So there's just really no logic to say someone has some sort of tangential or cultural connection, but therefore any criticism is a criticism of a particular religion, which he has some sort of connection to. I mean, you're really, 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 really grasping at straws to say that that's anti-Semitic to attack George Soros. And by the way, this is just my opinion as a non-Jewish person. So any of my millions of Jewish listeners that I love and adore, by all means, if you have something to input on this, just like anybody else, but yeah, leave it in the comments. All right, so moving on. So if it's not if criticism of George Soros is not based in anti-Semitism, what is it based on? It's really just based on he's a proponent, he's a donor, he funds all sorts of programs or politicians that ultimately support policies like letting people out of jail. He supports the BLM riots. He supports no cash bail. He supports getting rid of mandatory sentences. Basically, he supports supports reducing the punishments on people. Like in LA, there's a rule: if you shoplift less than $900, they don't put you in jail for it. I mean, that's crazy. So George Soros or nonprofits that he supports fund all those sort of policies, and those people get elected, and then they ultimately pass policies that are destroying cities like Chicago and LA and New York when it comes to crime. They're also going after patriots like Donald Trump who want to make America better, and they will just push, push, push for radical people. I mean, certainly they'll push for Biden if they have to, but if they have their druthers, they'll put in a real disruptor like a Bernie Sanders or Ilhan Omar or Rashida Tlaib or all these really terrible, destructive people that are harming America. Now, why does George Soros do that? Doesn't really make any sense, right? Well, there is a form of political thought that was put forth by a couple of political scientists called Cloward and Piven, who were based out of, I believe, Columbia University. But basically the idea is as long as our sort of capitalist, evil, racist society is doing well, we'll never get something different. So the idea is to strain the social welfare system and the judicial system and the criminal enforcement, the criminal justice system, I guess, and jails and courts and all that stuff on every level, and just sort of make society collapse. And then once it collapses, from those ashes, they can build up, this new utopian society of their dreams. Of course, utopias never work, but that's the idea. They want to destroy the current society, and if that causes some pain, so be it, because they'll be there standing the wings ready to rebuild it into some sort of socialist, communist, neo-Marxist, anti-racist utopia. So that's sort of why he's behind it. It won't work. It will harm many, many millions of people. It will really ruin the world if it ever came to pass. But giving him the benefit of the doubt, maybe his intentions are good, but it doesn't really matter, because you could list every dictator in history, and most of them, if you really went deep enough, their intentions were trying to do what they thought was best, but they were just incredibly misguided. And that would include the Soviets that killed, I believe, 20 million of their own people, or Mao was trying to make a perfect society, killed 50 million of his own people. And of course, we don't have to even mention Mr. Mustache there, but we all know what he did. So there you go. That's a little bit on George Soros. Not a Nazi, but a pretty bad guy by a completely different metric. I hope that answered the question: is George Soros a Nazi? And a little bit, what is he up to? Please, if you have any thoughts or comments, leave them in the comment section. And if there's anything else you want to hear in future programs, just leave it in the comments, and we'll try to get to that too.